You know, we always talk about America's vast energy resources,
All
right?
right.
But get this.
Okay.
Today's deep dive
Yeah.
throws us a curveball.
Really?
We're looking at excerpts from American Energy and Science Dominance
Hmm.
by Bernard L. McNamee.
Okay.
And he argues that we're not just headed for an energy crisis,
Uh,
we're already in one.
it's a fascinating, if controversial, take.
Yeah.
McNamee says the problem isn't a lack of resources.
Okay.
It's what he calls extreme green policies.
Okay, so let's unpack this. So he's saying that policies designed to prevent an energy crisis are actually causing one.
That's the gist of it, yeah.
Yeah.
He argues that these policies are creating artificial energy scarcity,
Okay.
leading to things like that less reliable electric grid we've been seeing,
Right.
and those sky-high prices at the gas pump.
So instead of relying on our own abundant energy sources, we end up dependent on
Countries like China,
China.
ironically.
Yeah.
McNamee argues this dependence, coupled with government mandates and a push for a national electric grid, is pushing us toward what he calls the nationalization of the U.S. energy industry.
Hold on. Nationalization. That's a pretty loaded term. What exactly does he mean by that?
He's suggesting that government overreach things like bans on certain types of energy production. And those massive spending bills like the IIJA and IRA are stifling innovation
Right.
and making us more reliant on government-controlled energy sources.
And he links all of this directly to the economic pain you're feeling, higher energy bills, businesses struggling to keep up, less money in your pocket.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And here's where it gets even more interesting. McNamee doesn't just focus on policy. He also highlights the increasing threat of cyber attacks on our energy infrastructure
Right.
from countries like Russia and China.
Didn't he mention the Colonial Pipeline cyber attack a couple of years back?
He did.
That was a real wake-up call.
Yeah, he uses that.
Yeah.
And the physical attacks on the power grid in North Carolina to illustrate just how vulnerable we are.
Right.
Imagine a well-coordinated cyber attack during a major cold snap. We're talking potential catastrophe.
So we've got this double whammy of what he sees as self-inflicted wounds from policy
Right.
and external threats to our energy grid.
Yeah.
What's McNamee's solution?
Buckle up. Because he proposes a radical overhaul of, well, pretty much everything. He wants to unleash American energy production.
Yeah.
Oil, natural gas, nuclear, the whole shebang.
He's basically saying, let the free market decide.
Exactly. He believes that empowering individuals and businesses to choose the energy sources that work best for them will ultimately lead to lower costs,
Okay.
increased energy security, and less reliance on those hefty government subsidies.
It's a pretty stark contrast to the current administration's focus on renewables. I have to admit, the idea of lower energy bills is appealing.
Sure.
But wouldn't a completely free market leave some communities behind?
That's a good question.
What about the environmental impact?
Those are important questions, and ones McNamee addresses head-on. He believes that a free market, combined with targeted investments in next-generation technologies, will lead to solutions that are both environmentally responsible and beneficial to all Americans.
Okay.
He argues that the current approach of picking winners and losers in the energy sector stifles innovation
Right.
and ultimately slows down progress. He's not against renewable energy.
Okay.
He's just against the government propping them up and controlling the market.
It's a bold vision, no doubt. So where does he go from here? Does he have specific policy proposals? Or is this more of a high-level philosophy?
Oh, he gets into the weeds, trust me.
Okay.
And one of his most radical ideas
Oh.
involves a complete restructuring of the Department of Energy itself.
A complete restructuring of the Department of Energy. You're really going to have to break that one down for me.
Remember how we were talking about energy security
Yeah.
and scientific advancement?
Right.
Well, McNamee sees those as two sides of the same coin, really.
Okay.
He proposes a total rebranding.
Okay.
He wants to rename the Department of Energy to the Department of Energy Security and Advanced Science.
Catchy. But I'm guessing it's more than just a name change.
Way more. He wants to fundamentally shift the department's mission. Imagine a world where the U.S. is not just energy independent,
Right.
but also a global leader in cutting-edge scientific research. That's his big vision.
So how does he actually propose to make that happen?
He lays out 5 core missions for this new department.
Okay.
First up, energy security, making sure the U.S. has a reliable and affordable supply of energy. Next, he puts national security front and center,
Okay.
arguing that energy dominance is crucial for maintaining America's standing in the world. Then there's a big emphasis on advanced science,
Why?
which he sees as closely tied to both energy and national security.
Okay, I'm following so far. Energy security, science, those all seem pretty interconnected. What else?
Now we get into the more controversial stuff.
Okay.
He also wants this new department to take the lead on developing new nuclear weapons and reactors.
Whoa. New nuclear weapons, that's going to raise some eyebrows for sure. But let's come back to that later. What's the fifth mission?
The fifth mission focuses on cleaning up legacy nuclear sites.
Right.
We're talking about those leftover messes from the Manhattan Project
Right.
and the Cold War.
Yeah, those radioactive waste dumps are a ticking time bomb. But back to this whole energy independence thing. How does he actually propose to wean the U.S. off foreign energy sources?
He's got a whole laundry list of ideas.
Okay.
But one of the most radical is his call to scrap those big spending bills you talked about earlier.
Right.
Like the IIJA and the IRA.
Yeah.
He's basically saying enough with those massive government subsidies for renewables.
So no more picking winners and losers in the energy market.
Exactly. He wants to unleash the power of the free market,
Okay.
arguing that this will lead to more innovation
Right.
and ultimately lower costs for consumers. He's not against renewables.
Right.
He just believes that the government shouldn't be in the business of propping them up.
It's a pretty radical departure from the current administration's approach, but I have to admit, the idea of lower energy bills is appealing. What are his thoughts on actually dealing with all that nuclear waste?
He suggests accelerating cleanup efforts by increasing private sector involvement,
Okay.
potentially even revisiting that controversial Yucca Mountain project.
Yucca Mountain, now that's a blast from the past.
Right.
That whole project was basically dead in the water, wasn't it?
It was. But McNamee seems to think it's time to at least put it back on the table.
Okay.
He argues that we need to get serious about finding long-term solutions for nuclear waste,
Right.
and that the private sector may be able to offer more innovative and cost-effective approaches than the government.
I can already imagine the political firestorm that would ignite if someone tried to revive that project, but it definitely sounds like he's not afraid of a little controversy.
Yeah.
So we've got energy, national security, science, nuclear weapons, radioactive waste. Did he leave anything out?
Actually, he also dives deep into the world of science policy.
Okay.
He argues that America's global standing depends on maintaining its technological edge, and he's worried about countries like China catching up.
He's got a point. So much of our economic and military might relies on us being ahead of the curve technologically.
Exactly, and he's concerned that the current focus on government-funded research into specific technologies,
Right.
like renewables,
Yeah.
is actually hindering broader innovation. He wants to see a shift towards creating an environment where scientific breakthroughs can happen organically,
Okay.
driven by the private sector.
So less government funding for things like renewable energy research and more focus on basic scientific research.
That's the gist of it. He believes that the government should focus on supporting fundamental scientific research
Okay.
through institutions like the national labs,
Right.
but that the private sector is better equipped to take those discoveries
Right.
and turn them into commercially viable technologies.
Interesting. So instead of pouring billions of dollars into picking winners and losers in the energy market, he's advocating for a more hands-off approach.
Yeah.
Letting the free market decide which technologies will truly revolutionize the energy sector.
Exactly. He believes that this approach will unleash American ingenuity
Okay.
and lead to solutions that are both more effective and more affordable for the average consumer.
It's a bold vision, no doubt. But how does he see all of this actually playing out in the real world? Does he get into the nitty-gritty details of how these agencies should actually operate?
Oh, absolutely. And that's where things get really interesting. He has thoughts on everything from cybersecurity to international energy policy. He even has specific ideas for reforming how agencies like the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission operate on a daily basis.
FERC.
Yeah.
Okay.
He really gets into the weeds.
FERC, huh? I gotta say, I don't really know a whole lot about how these regulatory agencies actually work.
It's a whole world, but it has a huge impact on your energy bills. McNamee argues that FERC, which regulates interstate transmission of electricity, natural gas, and oil, has become too focused on promoting specific energy sources
Okay.
instead of prioritizing affordability and reliability for consumers. He proposes a complete overhaul of their regulatory process.
So it's not just about energy policy at the national level, it's also about how these regulations are actually implemented and enforced on the ground.
Exactly. He gets surprisingly granular,
Really?
even suggesting specific reforms for the Nuclear Regulatory Commission.
Hmm.
He wants to streamline the approval process for new nuclear power plants,
Okay.
arguing that outdated regulations are stifling innovation
Right.
and making it really, really expensive to build new reactors.
Yeah. He really seems to have thought this through. I mean, most people wouldn't even know where to begin with, like reforming these really obscure regulatory agencies.
Yeah. It's clear he's done his homework.
Right.
He even proposes eliminating specific programs within the Department of Energy
Okay.
that he sees as, like, wasteful or redundant.
Hmm.
For example, he takes aim at the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations
Right.
and the Advanced Research Project's Agency Energy, arguing that they just duplicate efforts being made by the private sector.
It sounds like he really wants to streamline the federal government's approach to energy, right? Like just cutting out unnecessary bureaucracy and letting the free market take the lead.
That's the overarching theme, for sure. He argues that a leaner, more efficient Department of Energy will be better positioned to support fundamental scientific research,
Oh.
protect our critical energy infrastructure, and ensure affordable, reliable energy for all Americans. He even suggests reducing staffing for certain programs and eliminating the Clean Energy Corps, which he believes focuses too narrowly on a particular ideological agenda.
So it's a pretty radical vision, to say the least. He wants to reshape not just energy policy, but the very structure and function of the federal government itself.
It's certainly a bold proposal,
Yeah.
and he doesn't shy away from, the thorny issues either.
Yeah.
Remember our discussion about nuclear waste and cybersecurity?
Right.
He addresses those head on.
Okay. Remind me what he had to say about those.
Okay, so on nuclear waste, he advocates for a two-pronged approach. First, he wants to accelerate cleanup efforts by increasing private sector involvement, arguing, again, that market-based solutions will be more efficient and cost-effective. And second, he proposes revisiting Yucca Mountain as a potential long-term storage site.
Right.
He acknowledges the controversial nature of Yucca Mountain,
Right.
but argues that we need a permanent solution for nuclear waste
Yeah.
and that all options should be on the table.
Yeah. That Yucca Mountain proposal is going to be a tough sell, I think.
Sure.
But I get his point. We can't just keep kicking that can down the road forever.
Exactly.
What about cybersecurity?
On cybersecurity, McNamee emphasizes the importance of strengthening partnerships between the government and the private sector.
Okay.
He argues that the private sector has the expertise and the resources to develop cutting-edge cybersecurity technologies,
Right.
but they need the government to provide clear guidelines and a supportive regulatory environment. He also stresses the need for increased investment in protecting critical infrastructure,
Okay.
particularly the electrical grid and natural gas pipelines, from both physical and cyber attacks.
So he's not advocating for a completely hands-off approach, really. He still sees a role for the government in, like, setting standards, providing guidance, and investing in critical infrastructure.
Exactly. He's not anti-government.
Okay.
He just believes that the government should be more strategic in how it uses its power and resources.
Okay.
He argues that the free market, properly incentivized and regulated, is ultimately the best engine for innovation and progress.
It's a fascinating perspective. So after this deep dive into McNamee's ideas, what are you left with? What should our listeners take away from all of this?
I think the biggest takeaway is that energy policy is incredibly complex.
Right.
There are no easy answers, and every solution comes with its own set of trade-offs. McNamee's vision is just one perspective, and it's important to consider a variety of viewpoints before, forming your own conclusions. What do you think after diving into all this with me?
I think McNamee raises some really important points. He's right that we need to think long and hard about where our energy comes from, how we can ensure a reliable and affordable supply for the future, and how we can balance environmental concerns with economic growth. Whether you agree with his solutions or not, he forces you to confront some uncomfortable truths about the challenges facing the U.S. energy sector. It's a conversation we all need to be a part of, and that's what makes this deep dive so valuable, you know?
Mm.
He gives us the information we need to start asking those tough questions and demanding better solutions from our leaders. He doesn't just critique, he offers a roadmap, a different way of thinking about these complex issues.
I completely agree. He doesn't claim to have all the answers, but he certainly sparks a much-needed conversation.
Exactly. And that's what we're all about here on the deep dive, right? Giving you the information you need to form your own opinions and engage in these really important debates. So, until next time, keep those brain gears turning.